The Secret Story of Him. Chapter 21. Vibrations of the Jazzma. After we brought fire and judgment down upon Master Samuel and Kizzy's plantation, reducing it to ash, a strange and fleeting peace washed over me. For a moment, the world stood still. Around me stood the newly freed, 25 men, 86 women, 112 children. Some still held the smell of blood and smoke in their clothes. The children ranged from newborns to 18 years old, souls who had known nothing but captivity, while the Arkmen scoured the plantation ruins for food, weapons, and anything else of use. I gathered the survivors. They were weak, weary, and wounded, dragging behind them not just broken chains, but the invisible weight of generations. Chains you couldn't see, but could feel in every slow step, every flinch, every sudden sound. We turned toward the forest, toward the dark safety of the Ida Trail, that sacred artery of freedom. But before our feet could gain rhythm, the silence shattered, the distant howls of bloodhounds, the rhythmic thunder of marching boots, hundreds, maybe thousands. A storm of Confederate wrath bearing down on us. I screamed, "Run, run!" The air snapped. The crowd scattered, panic exploding. But Grace, young Grace, daughter of Ernestine, clutched her 3 babies like lifelines, twin newborns, Isaiah and Israel, and her little 2-year-old daughter Africa. She didn't even get one full step in. The hounds lunged from the dark like hell unleashed. They hit her like a hammer, slamming her and her 3 children to the ground. Before anyone could scream, one of the beast's jaws clamped around baby Israel's throat. A violent shake, and the child's neck snapped. With one vicious shake, he was gone, his small body limp, his spirit snatched. June or Joan, she didn't hesitate. She always stood for us no matter what the cost. She dove head first into the pack of hounds, tearing them off Grace with her bare hands. Blooded and desperate, Grace grabbed Africa and Isaiah and vanished into the shadows of the forest. The hounds, now tasted black blood, circled Joan, their eyes fixed on fury. I turned, roaring at the Arkmen to lead the others. Get them to the Ida Trail now. Then the hounds surged. Joan fought like a queen of the Dahomey Amazons, ferocious, unyielding. But there were too many. By the time I reached her, they had shredded her left arm down to the bone, shoulder to wrist. And yet, she was still standing, still swinging, still fighting. As I wrapped my arms around her, the hounds backed away. Her body trembled in my arms, countless wounds. Her blood poured onto me, hot and heavy. Then came the sound, rifles cracking, hundreds of them, bullets screamed through the trees. Around us, bodies began to drop, men, women, and children. Screams echoed, and death reached out with invisible hands. June looked up at me, her eyes, tired but unbroken, met mine. She whispered, "Thank you, Ian. Thank you for coming back for." She never finished. A shot rang out. Her skull cracked open against my chest, her brain spattering my face. Suddenly, I felt it, a sharp pinch. Then another, a third, a fourth, and then a fifth. A sharp, burning pain exploded in my chest, then again in my neck. My legs crumpled beneath me, and then the world blurred and went silent. The forest twisted, and everything went black. There was no white light guiding my soul to the beyond. No tunnel, no beckoning angel, no gates. Only green, a living green, deep and boundless, like the heart of an African forest untouched by time. Every shade of life shimmered in harmony, each leaf and vine a hymn to the sun, a divine thank you to the source, the giver, God's energy blooming through us breath. Here, in this sacred place between worlds, everything the light touched became more than it was. Wounds closed not like scabs, but like flowers blooming in reverse. Spirits, once twisted by grief, stood upright like saplings drinking sky. Energy flowed like rivers to the sea, carrying the murmurs and dreams of children not yet born. The sun is God's energy. It's the breath of God made visible. Just look around you. Its light does not merely illuminate, it consecrates. Whatever it kissed, it awakened. Whatever it touched, it healed. Whatever it blesses, it renders sacred. Faith had always been a foreign tongue in my mouth, a language I could never speak with conviction. It felt too much like surrender, too much like kneeling when everything in me demanded I stand and fight. They turned me into a wolf, and wolves do not pray for prey. We hunt, we stalk, we take, we survive. But again, I was wrong. Then she appeared, rising from the mist like the first light of dawn breaking over the peak of the world's first mountain, the Jazzma. Her presence shattered silence. Her voice struck harder than thunder, cracking the bones of the earth. You never knew God, because you could not see. You never knew Allah, because you would not listen. You never knew love, because you never knew me. I am the Jazzma, goddess of life, goddess of liberty, goddess of love. She was older than fire, wiser than the ocean, sacred long before the earth remembered its own name. Her skin held every scream of defiance, every cry for freedom that ever split the night. She had walked beside the first warriors when they lifted spears against the sky people, the Anunnaki who crowned themselves gods and forged chains for men. Her whispers stirred the dreams of prophets and revolutionaries. Jesus drew her strength in the desert. Muhammad heard her echo in the cave. Buddha touched her stillness beneath the tree. She had kissed courage into Frederick Douglass's, and later, her lungs would guide Bayard Rustin's hands as he mapped justice, sharpened James Baldwin's pen until it sang like a blade. She was there when Thurgood stood defiant before a hostile bench, when Malcolm roared like thunder, when Martin dreamed aloud, when Joe Madison's voice traveled through radio static, carrying her gospel into the bones of the awakening world. All black eagles, sacred messengers, divined by ancient light. Listen. To read is not with eyes alone, nor listening with mortal ears. True understanding blooms when inner sight awakens what the soul reveres. The third eye opens to worlds unseen. The third ear catches songs between the spaces where all knowledge dwells, and deeper wisdom softly tells its secrets to the patient heart that learns to see beyond the start of ordinary sight and sound, where black eagles or truth is found. And then she told me the secret, shifting like water, like flame, like infinite possibility, is that God was never outside of you. God is energy. Energy is soul. It transforms. It transfers. It reshapes, renews, reclaims. What you call death is simply energy changing, finding new homes, new uses, new ways to love. She gestured, and understanding slammed into me like truth breaking a dam. Flesh returns to soil, blood feeds the root. But love builds bridges that time cannot burn. Love threads ancestors' whispers into children's laughter. Love turns strangers into kin, victims into liberators, the enslaved into the free. God is will made visible, she said, now her voice softening like a mother waking her child from nightmare. There is no cosmic scorecard, no tally of sins or golden gates in the sky, only energy that creates and energy that consumes. The Creator did not bind you with commandments, but entrusted you with choice, then set your soul ablaze with the strength to wield it. You were not made to beg for mercy, you were made to bend reality. So choose, and let the universe bear witness to what you become. The kings, the presidents, the masters, the CEOs, and the rich rarely apologize, because they understand the laws of the universe. Energy, once set in motion, does not beg for forgiveness. It moves, it devours, it reshapes. Anything in its way is either consumed or destroyed. That's God's will. Your war, for justice, not just for yourself, but for all the chained, the silenced, the broken. That is sacred. That is the energy that heals worlds. She stepped aside, and the forest blazed brighter. From the mist came Mama Kalisa, not bent, not bruised, not broken. Her radiance restored, her dignity untouched by time or torture, and behind her surged a sea of souls, millions strong, no longer chained but linked by light. Solidarity, not slavery. Africans walked beside Europeans whose guilt birthed redemption. Arabs, who chose compassion over commerce, stood hand in hand with Mexicans who gave their lives for strangers' freedom. Asians who knew that injustice anywhere ruins justice everywhere lifted their arms in blessing. And at the edge where light recoiled, crouched the few, the kings, the merchants, the architects of agony, those who fed on power, who drank from cups filled with others' tears, their crowns now rust, their gold, dust. Remember this, the Jazzma said, her voice dissolving into the sun. Wealth without humanity is soul starvation. Those who fed themselves by starving others will find that in eternity's economy, the first shall be last. And the meek do not inherit because they are weak. They inherit because they love despite. Her last words fell like seeds in my soil. Just as the rose rises past the canopy to find the sun, you too must rise. God's energy is God's will, and that will lives in you now like sap in the tree, like blood in the heart, like hope breaking dawn. The green began to shimmer, the souls began to fade, but her voice lingered in the echo of light. Now rise, sunrise, rise. They clawed me back to consciousness. 3 weeks had passed as I lay in the belly of a Georgia swamps, my body a symphony of agony, each heartbeat a war drum pounding against shattered ribs. Pain had become my religion, and I its most devoted disciple. But beneath the screaming of torn flesh and splintered bone, something fouler stirred, something ancient and unforgiving, too black to bow, too broken to break, too damned to die. They've been hunting me for months like a rabid dog through the pine forests of Chatham County, bloodhounds baying for my scent while Confederate cavalry thundered behind them like the horsemen of some twisted apocalypse. But it wasn't the Arkmen who found me first when I collapsed, blood soaking the earth and staining the Spanish moss a deep, violent crimson. It was them, the women whose chains I had shattered back on Master Samuel's plantation, the ones I had freed. Luan appeared first through the cypress mist like an avenging spirit, her weathered hands steady as a surgeon's as she pressed moss to my wounds. Behind her came Flag, her severed tongue replaced by eyes that spoke volumes of vengeance. Denise emerged from the shadows carrying roots that smelled of earth and ancient secrets, while Auntie Zhang and Mayan flanked my broken body like guardian angels armed with knowledge older than slavery itself. They dragged me to safety. It took days, careful not to leave a trail of blood. They moved slow and silent, each step a risk. These women, Denise, Renee, Ernestine, Pamela, Joyce, Glenda, Monique, Sheila, and Charlene took turns hauling my broken body through the swamps. They saved my life, and they did it like ghosts, slipping through Confederate Georgia unseen, invisible to the white eyes that had never bothered to see them as human. While the Arkmen drew the dogs west toward Valdosta in a brilliant sacrifice of misdirection, leading entire battalions on a phantom chase through the Okefenokee, these women became my resurrection. Their hands that had picked cotton until they bled, hands that had been forced to service masters in the dark, hands that had buried too many children. These same hands now worked miracles over my dying flesh. They chanted in the old tongues, Gullah prayers that tasted of salt and sorrow, Yoruba incantations that made the very air shimmer with power, Akan words that called the ancestors from their rest. In the bowels of an abandoned rice plantation near Savannah, where the soil still remembered screams, they summoned the remnants of Odu ancestral wisdom carried across oceans in bone and breath, not with wands or spales, but with roots, ash, and blood working beneath collapsed rafters and whispering moss, awakening a force the old world tried to burn and the new world tried to bury. Charlene fed me broths made from sassafras root boiled with the bark of sweet gum trees, while Flag ground Cherokee purple into a paste that burned like holy fire when pressed into my wounds. They mixed red Georgia clay with indigo leaves smuggled from Charleston, creating poultices that drew poison from my blood like drawing sin from a sinner's soul. You freed us, Napole whispered, her healing magic weaving through the air. Her voice, though rough as tree bark, was laced with a profound gratitude. Your Mama Kalisa, she would be swelling with pride to see the man you've become, to know you brought us this day. Night after night, they sang me back from the edge of the grave. Not the spirituals white folks expected, but older songs, darker songs. Songs that remembered Africa and called upon gods whose names had been beaten from their tongues, but never from their hearts. They sang of Oya, goddess of storms and guardian of the gates between worlds. They sang of Shango, lord of thunder and divine justice. They sang until the Spanish moss swayed without wind, and the swamp itself seemed to lean in and listen. Hidden beneath the ruins of Ebenezer Baptist Church, a sanctuary that had sheltered runaways since before the Revolution, where Denmark Vesey himself had once preached rebellion, they showed me newspapers yellowed with age and fresh with blood. The Savannah Republican spoke in hushed terror of phantom Negroes who struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. The Atlanta Intelligencer reported supply trains found burned to ash, their guards discovered days later, throats opened like second mouths, their bodies arranged in patterns that made grown men cross themselves and mutter prayers. General Sherman's men whispered of an invisible black regiment moving parallel to their march to the sea, burning everything the Union Army left standing. Confederate intelligence spoke of a figure they called the Bigfoot or the Dark Prophet, a specter who appeared wherever slavers died screaming, wherever plantations burned brighter than the sun. They were speaking of me, of us, of what we had become. But it was Auntie Jean who cut deepest when I asked why they had risked everything to save one man. Her eyes that had watched her own children sold like livestock, eyes that had seen horrors that would drive weaker souls to madness, fixed on mine with an intensity that made me feel transparent. "You ain't just a man no more, Him," she said, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "You a weapon forged in our pain. You the answer to every prayer we screamed into pillows so Massa wouldn't hear. You the rage we swallowed for so long it turned to poison in our bellies. You are vengeance walking on two legs, breathing fire, spilling the blood they've been spilling for centuries." She leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "You ain't never walked alone, child. You've been carried, like a prayer passed down through every storm, by hands that loved you before you ever opened your eyes." Over the long month that followed, I felt myself dying and being reborn simultaneously, not into flesh, but into something harder, something forged in the furnace of their love and tempered in the fire of their fury. They fed me not just with roots and remedies, but with stories that cut deeper than any blade, with truths that burned hotter than any flame. By the time I could stand again, walk again, hold a weapon again, I was no longer the man who had collapsed bleeding on that Georgia plantation. I was the Son of God, not in glory but in burden. I was His judgment made flesh, His silence made thunder. I was the weapon they forged in the dark, the blade tempered in grief, the fire that memory fed. I was a walking prayer for justice, each step a song, each breath a drumbeat for the forgotten. I stood with the bent backed, the gutted, the ones whose blood turned cotton fields into graveyards. I was their resurrection. I was their revenge. I was Him, not as I had made myself, but as they had remade me, from ash, from bone, from prayer and fury. And so I rose from the ruins, not as a man, but as reckoning made real, the breath of Jazzma's prophecy and Auntie Jean's prayer walking in unison. I emerged from that swamp not with vengeance alone, but with vision, one sharpened by centuries of chains and stoked in the furnace of forgotten names. The Arkman would return, not as whispers in Confederate nightmares, but as storms in Union prophecy. The earth had swallowed my blood and returned me sanctified, weaponized, sanctuaried, and as I led the group toward the Ida Trail, beneath a canopy thick with ghosts and gunpowder, wrapped in the breath of the dead and the prayers of those who carved gods out of grief, I felt it in my bones. The Confederacy wasn't dead yet, but it was already bleeding, and we were the blade. It was us. It was me, the Arkman. The lie of emancipation would fall. The myth of white saviors would burn, and history, that crooked record, would finally be rewritten in the language of fire and blood, not by presidents, not by proclamations, but by the enslaved who freed themselves. by the hunted who learned to hunt, by the ghosts who refused to stay buried. We were never waiting for freedom. We were the war.
They lied to you. They told you Lincoln freed the slaves. They told you we waited on freedom. They told you history was written in ink, but it was written in blood. Our blood. This is not the history they taught you in school. This is the story they tried to bury. The story of the enslaved who became warriors, the women who became gods, the man who freed more than Harriet. This is the secret story of him. Uncensored, unforgiving, unapologetically black. If you're tired of watered-down history, if you feel the fire in your blood, if you know we freed ourselves, like, comment, share, subscribe. Tag someone who needs to wake up. The secret story of him, we freed ourselves. Black liberation, rewriting history.